fluturimit, të cilat janë ndjekur nga
Protesta kanë qenë?
Po, shiko dhe veri.
Por duhet parasteshuar ajo i shërben njëkohësisht të gjitha palëve dhe muaji shtator do të tregojë rezultatet konkrete.
I want to say the truth. I want to say the reality, and so I feel fine to be a journalist.
Dritari, shikojmë kombinati ka drita, shikojmë në autostrada.
Që e vogël kisha dëshirë të bëhesha gazetare. Unë zgjodha gazetarin si deg për të vazhduar rrugën e drejtësisë.
Right where the southeastern part of Europe begins to taper off lies the soil of Albania. It is a tiny country, a little bit bigger than Maryland, with an almost unbelievable history. Albania is a case study for exploring how manufactured truth damages a country. The land of eagles, as the Albanians call their country, encounters serious problems, revealing this truth about their nation. Occupying the western edge of the Balkan Peninsula, Albania is blessed with waters of the Adriatic and Ionian Seas. Their waters wash the feet of the mountains that separate Albania from the neighboring states of Greece, Macedonia, Serbia, and Montenegro. This is home to a very homogeneous population of 3.5 million, 95% of which are native Albanians. Historically, they are descendants of Illyrs and speak the official language of Albania, called Shqip.
Sa koka pa ju paguar?
Unë për shembull bashkë me ca shokë mi, unë kam maj, qeshor, korrik edhe gushi që janë shumë.
Kemi 4 muaj që sa japin lekët, edhe me në lidh tek tana na kapin atë grupi gatshëm dhe na rrafin.
For the last 2,000 years, Albania has been attacked and invaded by Romans, barbarians, Slavs, and Ottomans. Since gaining its independence in 1912, Albania has been a protectorate, a parliamentary republic, a monarchy, and a socialist republic. There are two ways we learn about the world: history and media. History is slow and analytical, while media is fast and condensed. A free and independent media that informs, educates, and transforms societies is the check and balance mechanism of people over its own government. Often considered to be the fourth power, media has always been the target of political regimes. What is the status of the media in Albania? Has the Albanian media ever been free? Is it free now? Does it reveal the truth?
After traveling through Albania, you see hundreds and hundreds, maybe even thousands of cement bunkers which were part of communism.
Albanians never imagined that the invasion and occupation of their country by the Italians and Germans during the Second World War would be replaced with the more severe imprisonment of consciousness. Albanian dictator Enver Hoxha rose to power in 1944. Albania remained a loyal communist state until the walls of the Cold War came down in the early 1990s.
In the dictator, you cannot imagine. It was an absurdity.
Ndjenjat tona të dashurisë e të mirënjohjes së thellë I drejtohen partisë.
We've been in a demagogy. We have had two lives, one interior life and one common life. It was a contradiction between two lives. So it was a deformation of personality.
Almost 1/3 of the population was executed, imprisoned, or persecuted.
In Enver Hoxha time, artists has been
has been in prison. We work only socialist style. In Albanian language is realism socialist. But if you paint other style, is very bad after.
In Hoxha's regime, nothing was a coincidence. After teaching everyone to read and write, as well as providing electrical power to every home, the stage was set to start manipulating people's minds with the magic of television.
I mean, in Albania, as in so many other countries, both Western and countries from Asia and all over the world, television and radio were created as tools of the government in power. To say propaganda is fair, but that's only a small part of it. They were the information vehicles for the government. They were a tool.
Traditionally, media offered almost nothing. The government controlled Albania's only radio station, which began broadcasting in 1938. Established in 1970, the state-run television station was the first and only TV station in the country for a period of 30 years. Also, several newspapers, such as the one for the Communist Party, another for the trade unions, and one aimed at culture, were published during communism.
At that time, the best newspaper was culture newspaper, because in culture you can find much more space to say something more than in other press. But I remember, for instance, that even according to some statistics, 80% of the stories, at least in the written press, they were comments, or half news, half comments.
Hoxha set the rules for all media in accordance with his obsessive need to defend Marxist and Leninist doctrines. In this light, one might ask, what did media do? Did it inform the public at all?
It informed only with the message that the state wanted the people to have. And from my point of view, feeling particularly that you could not trust the media. It's a good reason that not only in Albania, but in most of the Balkan nations, still today, the media are nowhere as trusted as they are in Western countries.
So the truth offered through TV was not what people actually experience. With his ever-vigilant eye, the dictator sowed fear among media workers and mistrust in the audience. Rather than an instrument of the truth, people perceived media as a weapon of the government, a notion still haunting Albanian media today.
And this is the most fascinating country that I've been to in a long time, but it feels like I've stepped back 2 centuries. Early in the 90s, people were still learning how to drive cars, for example. Under Hoxha, they had never been able to even own cars. Only government and the military could have the cars.
There are 2 clear, distinct groups. The older people who lived under communism, who are now living in a free, open democracy, and then the young people who didn't live in communism. You see kind of like a blank stare in some of them. These are the people that are kind of like in this transition period where they're not too sure how to deal with the big changes that have occurred.
The truth of today's Albania is harsh. The little country is one of the poorest in Europe. Economic instability is the price for its politics. Unable to come up with a perestroika and glasnost reformist plan, as occurred in other Eastern European countries, Albanian politics fell into confusion. In the span of 14 years, between 1990 and 2005, Albania has had 6 general elections, 8 governments, and 4 presidents. During these confusing times, the media had to adjust to the standards of democracy. The old communist system provided no foundation for young journalists in Albania today, who now seek jobs with privately owned media that must survive as businesses. There are new laws in place to protect them and professional rules to follow. The Albanian media is struggling to operate under these standards.
I think it's only fair to say that old habits die hard. What I would really characterize the Albanian media as is a media system that is now growing almost against the will of the old habits, of the old characteristics, but is still very much burdened by them, as well as some new sins like corruption.
I think the journalism is in danger in Albania because the journalism lives by the truth, by the reality. The citizens want to listen to the truth, but the politicians and the financial organization doesn't prefer to listen to this truth. It's a contradiction between two interests.
Scholars who study the development of media in Eastern Europe identify two phases as the media navigate an increasingly democratic system. One, the euphoric period of new freedom, and two, the media as business.
You see first a great explosion of media. You see a sort of a lot of media being used for political purposes, for personal purposes, as weapons. Then you see over time a kind of a winnowing out, a perspective being gained, and usually what's happening at the same time is that the politics are settling down, the economy is becoming better. That's usually not good for the number of journalistic outlets, but it's usually good for the quality of journalism.
In Albania, the phase of free expression was accompanied by an explosion of print media. Later, beginning in 1996, private television stations began to mushroom. Today, there are almost 90 licensed TV broadcast stations. With only 3 stations viewed nationally, the majority of these TV stations are local broadcast outlets. Besides a $5 annual fee for public television, no one pays to receive a TV signal, although there are fees for cable and digital services. Statistically, there is 1 TV station for every 40,000 viewers. The dawn of democracy in Albania marked the end of communist control over the media industry. However, the vacuum was quickly filled with similar forms of control.
But it's important to say that my generation came into journalism together with politicians that overthrew the communism. And for some years, in the beginning, was difficult to, to divorce from those politicians.
Paradoxically, Albanians might tolerate mere sympathy for a particular political party, but the situation runs deeper than sympathetic views. Due to the poor economy, the biggest advertiser in the country is the Albanian government. Therefore, a TV station's survival often depends on conformity to the wishes of the predominant political party.
You can see how some media are supporting openly one of the other political party. They are not ashamed to do it, but they do it openly.
In the mid-90s, all it took to have your own media outlet was some loyalty to a political party, a 2-bedroom apartment, some basic equipment, and no license. As for journalists, there was no problem, since it was felt that anyone could perform those duties. Piracy of programming was a norm. You could see the same soccer match on 10 different stations simultaneously. You could sit on your sofa and watch the latest Hollywood movies, and see the same news event reported in many different ways. The truth in these reports was heavily distorted. For this reason, violence among and toward members of the press and even imprisonment of journalists were common occurrences. The first effort to regulate this chaotic market was the creation of the National Council of Radio and Television in 1998. This institution is equivalent to the Federal Communications Commission, or FCC, in the United States. The information industry in Albania had entered the media as a business phase in its development.
I think that, strangely, the greatest problem for Albanian radio and television is to make money. They have to be profitable. Advertising pays for good journalism. Otherwise, what pays for the journalism? And that's either corruption of a blatant nature, or it is the problem that exists a lot in Albania and many countries, and that is that the television station, the journalism organization, is owned by a successful business person who has other businesses. And the other businesses subsidize the television station. And then there is the opportunity for corruption, because agencies, political leaders can say, well, we will not grant you the permits and the licenses to run your other businesses successfully if you don't show us favorable coverage in your television station.
This is the Achilles heel of Albanian media. Direct government control has been taken over by a more sophisticated and camouflaged type of control.
But you had situations where the government itself was, and this was documented, was funding newspapers, was sending what were then contingency or emergency funds, so that it didn't have to go through public record to newspapers. You had situations where, and I saw this myself on a number of occasions, where political figures, I would see them sitting with the journalists in the newsroom as the journalists were writing their stories. And these were not just Albanian politicians. It's something that in an American newsroom you'd never see.
This new form of control has a negative impact on journalism, especially in the coverage of acute social conditions. Albania has one of the highest levels of unemployment and crime in the European continent. Corruption extends down to very personal levels.
They're not paying me enough, the journalist says, so I will seek a bribe from my source. Or they're not really paying me enough to work hard enough to get the story correctly. To a certain extent, you see that in all transitional countries.
Despite the fact that it is one of the richest European countries when it comes to water and hydroelectric resources, electrical outages of 6 to 7 hours are very common. Infrastructure suffers greatly. To have running water for a whole day is a dream for most people.
Shumë keq. 3 muaj po bëj pa drita. Po bëjmë për ujë tash. Për ujë shumë keq ne. Për ujë veti po bëjmë 5 muaj neve pa ujë. Jemi 100 shtëpi atje neve pa ujë. Si vete kjo pa ujë?
And even though Albania is rife with social concerns, politics remains the priority of television coverage. According to a report prepared by the Albanian National Council of Radio and Television, political developments are the top stories on Albanian TV, followed by international news and then the activity of the government.
And there are these senseless pictures of meetings, big tables at expensive, government buildings that this man on the street never sees, never cares about. And these stories go on and on and on in Tirana. But out in Peshkapi, even in nearby Durrës, in Pogradec, that's not so important. They're much more inclined to do a story about the mayor tearing down illegal buildings that don't pay taxes. The journalists, both video journalists and writing journalists, need to demand accountability, and that's hard to do.
Today, things are just beginning to change as more social issue stories are covered in TV newscasts.
We're talking about the problems of the new road here that are built here in Tirana, and they have got many problems with the drainage system, etc., etc. Black waters, dirty waters. Inhabitants are now, they doesn't believe that the road, it will be another time new.
Since the interests of different groups are at stake, covering social issues is not easy. In Albania, the lack of professionalism among its journalists tops the list of reasons why social concerns remain in the shadows.
First of all, reporters here, cameramen, they have not studied the proper school, or even there is a journalism university here, but I can say cannot fulfill the need of the market for the moment. So almost everybody is not professional. I mean, totally 100% professional. But the other difficulties is that here is a small country in a way. You know everybody. I mean, it shows up your cousin here, another friend here, and it's very difficult to keep the balance.
While the size of Albania is a fact that cannot be altered, improvement in the education of its journalists is something that can be changed.
That's the nature of the news. And particularly it's the nature of international news.
Professor Byron Scott of the University of Missouri School of Journalism served as a visiting professor at Tirana University during the fall semester of 2001.
The teachers there are, I think, in general, facing a lot of barriers. Too many students, not enough support. They have to hold other jobs to support their families. And then they're coming out of a situation where they are trying to learn a new way of teaching that was not encouraged in the past. The previous system, for example, there was primarily lecture-oriented. Students take copious notes, the lectures, you test them at the end of the semester, but they don't get to do active journalism. Well, they're trying to change that over now into a combination. But the situation is extremely difficult.
In order to fill the gaps of education, a system of exchange scholars and journalists was developed by foreign embassies within Albania. As part of one such program established through the U.S. State Department, TV news and documentary videographer Hugo Pérez visited and taught in Albania during the summer of 2002.
I worked with the photographers, with the editors, and with the reporters when we went out on stories. I showed them different ideas, different techniques, trying to integrate more natural sound, trying to share with them the idea to possibly talk to the people of the community. There was an unusual, strange situation where I was showing some of the photographers and reporters just story ideas from some stories that I had been involved in when I used to work in Texas. And the particular story showed an interview of a once homeless person who looked apparently overweight, and this ex-homeless person was now helping people at a homeless shelter. I showed the reporters and the photographers this interview, and one of the photographers responded, "We would never show an interview of a woman who's that ugly on our TV station." And it was it was kind of like shocking almost. At most stations here in the US, you try and stay objective and not judge people by the way they look.
Aldon Lipes spent 9 months at New Mexico State University as part of an exchange program. He is now a radio and TV personality in Albania.
Well, I worked in KRWG mainly as a cameraman or doing some package stories. And I decided to supply here in Albania between what I've learned there and tradition here. It's a new window where we can see the other part of the world.
Journalistic resources.
Outsiders not only provide examples of good journalistic standards, but help to restore hope to those who may have lost it and to instill hope for those journalists still in the classroom.
The most tragic thing in the world would be if those students got discouraged before the situation changes.
In Albania, the relationship between media, truth, and politics is a complex one. Communism wove fear from reality. Early democracy created doubts about the nature of truth and freedom. Today's struggle is to transform the image of the media and restore the trust of the public.
Fewer political talking heads. The long comments, 30, 60, 90 seconds from a politician just yapping away, talk, is worthless to the people.
Hopefully that exposure of seeing media from other countries will show the journalists and the media owners in Albania that you kind of have to have a balance to the story ideas that are being presented, and that you have to dig a little bit deeper when you're investigating a story.
Many things have changed since the first days of free television. Many things need to be improved. It will not be an easy process.
I think that the progress there will come, but I think it's going to be nowhere as fast as many Albanians had hoped as much as 4 or 5 years ago. There'll be a time when we'll point to Albania and Albanian journalism as part of the regular recognizable array of what journalists is about. It won't be like the wagging the dog where Albania in the movie was when it was put upon as the stereotype of isolation.
The road to independence and truth is long and difficult, but there is energy and hope. In Albania, 80% of journalists are younger than 30. As Albania moves toward Europeanization, the quality of its television and journalism will improve. The country of Albania has learned that to be free is not enough. Simple human truth is independent of politics and business, and the media that informs and educates a people should enjoy this level of freedom.
Po do të bëhemi këtu duke uruar që kemi të këndshëm të programeve në vazhdim bashkë me